Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Let's begin the show. Get rid of that. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome. Welcome to Whining On. My name is Matthew Bowden, the Incorrigible Rogue. And today I am very, very pleased to have with me Cate Great. Cate, hey. Oh, I muted you there. I do apologize. There you go. You're in the room.
That's okay. I love to talk to myself. It's really, I keep myself quite pleasant company.
I know the feeling, especially during the last year.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, pretty much. This is my room, and this is like basically where I have experienced life for the last year. I've actually done at least 2 performances, several interviews, and a couple of panels from my room, which I never expected my room to become my performance venue and studio space.
Yeah, everything happens from the home now. You perform, you live, you eat, you sleep.
Yeah, it'd be nice to have a bit of separation, to tell you the truth.
Well, hopefully soon. I know that we're going to be opening up in the next couple of months. I don't know how you guys are doing there.
I mean, we may be opening up soon, but whether or not that's a good idea, that's a different question. Because I don't know if you know this, but our cases are still quite out of control here, and it's pretty wild. I can't believe these people in Texas. We've plateaued at 60,000 cases a day, which is more than some countries have had, and that's our day. And people are like, "Oh yeah, let's go do shows."
Never underestimate. Sorry, you carry on.
Oh, it's okay. I'll be honest with you. I would like to do shows again when it is safe to do shows, and not I love to juggle, but not enough to kill grandma. I know outdoors is a little bit better, but I don't know if you've met street performance audiences, but they're not. It's not always a selection of the best thinking people.
Well, also as well, people get carried away. We did shows last year for a couple of months when lockdown opened up, and you would have to actually try and get people to socially distance because people get carried away in the moment. And for performers, you can never underestimate the will to self-deceive if it's within your own personal interests. But
people will sometimes come after you for telling them what to do. They're like, "Oh, I'm not gonna." And then this country, we have so many conspiracy theorists about masks that if you ask them to put on a mask, they'll punch you. So it's a weird place to live, man.
Yeah, may we live in strange times has not become a light-hearted adage anymore.
No, it's true.
But let's get to the thing of the podcast. There's thousands of people discussing this subject right now, and I think there's one particular subject that we can discuss here that no one else can, and it's your life and why you do what you do. You've traveled all over the world. You performed in some of the biggest venues for street theatre around. You've been described by many people I've talked to as one of the great street performers there. You've got an ability to, what was said today was, go to any place in the world and quickly have a look at the crowd and understand the crowd you're working with, which I think is incredible. And the thing I'm interested in for that is, why start on this life? Why begin this? Did you have parents in amateur dramatics? Were you a theatre child?
Well, a little bit a theater child. I did theater in middle school, and I did take a minor in theater in university. But I will tell you that I was real bad in middle and high school, real bad. I did not understand how it all worked, and there was a part of me that was quite closed off, and I didn't honestly learn to really, really come out of that shell until after I was working for a while. And then once I went to circus school later, I bloomed quite a lot.
So were you a nervous, kind of isolated child, or were you playing up and becoming the center of attention because of these problems you had inside yourself?
Well, I was quite a shy child, and I was a bit feminine as a kid, and that makes you a bit of a target. And it used to be really fun to try to make me cry in middle school, and I didn't really get that was a recreational activity for some people, and so I had to learn to toughen up quite a bit, and then eventually I learned that I could be funny to deflect a lot of that. And I was also always quite athletic. So when I was starting in middle school, when I was a kid, I played baseball, and then I learned to water ski and sail and inline skate, and I was a competitive swimmer, and I was quite competitive actually. Not the fastest swimmer in my region, but like faster than probably anybody you know personally, unless you know somebody who's really good. And that's also where I am as a juggler. Like, I'm not the best juggler in the world, but I'm probably better than anyone you know, unless you know like world-class jugglers. And for street I got into circus through amateur circus at my university. A number of my cousins, my last name is Flaherty, so I have a pretty large family. And a number of my cousins went to Florida State, and they were in the amateur circus there. And when I got to circus, I had always kind of thought it was dumb. My cousins tried to teach me how to juggle. I didn't quite really get it until I had turned 18. And then one day I tried it and it kind of worked. But I worked on 2-ball cascade like when I was 10 years old or 14 years old or something. And I just couldn't get it. It was so bad. I never thought I would be able to juggle. And one day it clicked. So I came into university with, the ability to do kind of a front flip through like backyard gymnastics. And I had taken some adult gymnastics classes, and I could do a handstand. And then I was like, how do all of these things fit together? And when I started in the circus, I went, oh yeah, I could do all of those things and perform. And I just really fell in love with it. And more I was neglecting my studies and getting into circus. And it just
was it an experiment to begin with when you started? Was it when you went to go into the circus? You didn't have an intention to do it? You thought, I'll give it a go and see what happens, kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. Another cousin of mine was on the water ski team, and I had been going out skiing with them. And I thought maybe like he was the captain of the water ski team. And I thought maybe I would go into water skiing as my university activity. And then I did the circus, and it just consumed my life to the point where in the summer I worked for summer camps teaching circus. And then I eventually ended up doing small gigs. I kind of dropped in and out of college a few times, was doing small background corporate stilt walking kind of gigs on the side. And then I started doing school tours, and I eventually finished up my university degree out of like a sort of obligation. And after a sort of catastrophic injury, I broke my leg. And,
was that to do with work in the circus, or was that something else?
Yeah, I broke it on a trampoline training. I was doing trying to do triples into a foam pit, and I just hit the bed so hard that I snapped my leg. It was not exciting.
And did that not dissuade you from circus life?
No. In fact, it's what got me into handstands and juggling. Because originally I wanted to be a tumbler and a high-flying acrobat. I wanted to do flying trapeze. And, when your leg is in 2 pieces, you can't really do a lot of that. It took me a year before I could tumble again. And I never tumbled right after that. So I threw my energy into handstands and juggling, and that's how I really learned 5 balls, because it's quite hard to go after all of them when your leg is in a cast.
I'm a 4-ball juggler as well. I never got past the 5-ball wall.
Yeah. I break your leg in half and spend a year not being able to do much anything else, and it'll get you there. I don't recommend it at all, but it's one way to do it.
And I'll just pull you back a little bit here. So I just want to get a better idea of your progression in schooling, because it seems like from what we said so far, you went for a class in university, and then the next minute you're doing work and gigs. So was it that you went to this class and within weeks you were kind of a natural and these things came to you straight away, or?
A lot of the skills that I'd had previously just transferred over pretty quickly. And then I fell in love, and it was the first year of university that I really spent all of my energy training. And I wouldn't say that I was good, not at the technical level that I'm at right now, but I would say that that's my radiator. That is exactly my radiator going off. Welcome to Boston, everyone. Yeah, we're going to live with that for the moment. Anyway.
So when you say you went training, were you training in a gym, or was it a big top, or what was the environment to train in?
Right. I should probably explain for people who are not used to the Florida State Circus. We had a whole setup, like a whole 3-ring traditional circus setup. There was about 100 people in the the circus, it was classified as a university activity, which is a step above a university club. So it was classified as a university activity, and there was like 3 rings, and we had everything like traditional that you would see in Barnum and Bailey's, because the circus program was founded in 1947. So it was still like 1947 style acts. It was, we had slack rope. That was one of the disciplines I did. Flying trapeze, double trapeze, swinging trapeze, bicycle built for 5, hand balancing teams, juggling, group juggling acts. Weirdly, I only did the juggling act like once or twice, because the school frowned on, the director of the program really frowned on solo juggling. Only passing juggling was acceptable. It was a weird time. So yeah, I had spent my whole first year training all of these different apparatuses. I did like double trapeze, I did slack rope, I was juggling by myself, I was doing working on handstands by myself. And then that first summer, I started working for summer camps, teaching children, and my skills improved even more. And then I kind of got very distracted.
There? Really sorry, I'm just interested. How intensive was the tutorship there? Were the people, when you were training, constantly watching you and going, no, this, or?
It was very hands-off. So it was very like amateur circus. We had with the circus director, and we had one full-time kind of coach, but then everybody just sort of taught each other. The older students taught the younger students. And that way, like all of the acts were kind of prescribed from generation to generation. So everybody sort of just did the same act. So the training was not highly technical, but I was really ambitious. So I spent all of my time obsessing and like sucking up as much knowledge as I could. And then when I went outside, I learned even more. And then after that first year of university, I kind of got in a little trouble and dropped out. And that's when I started doing, background gigs, and I like soaked up everything I could from the professionals around me. After I went back, I was still another couple of years in the university program, but I was also still learning from everyone I could. At that point, I had met some real professionals, and I also had done a couple of school tours. So I learned how to perform in a very like straightforward, cheesy. We had a program where we basically lived on a tour bus, and the guy who did the program, we'd come in, we'd set up, we'd teach the children like 2 or 3 like big group juggling lessons. And then after that, we did a show for the kids, kind of like, you've learned to juggle, here's what you can do with juggling. And the way that he made a living was to hawk souvenirs and cotton candy. So my job was to make hundreds of bags of cotton candy a day. I'd get up at like 6 o'clock in the morning, make like 300 to 600 bags of cotton candy, brush the cotton candy out of my hair, put on my costume, and run on stage and do my show with the guy. And then we'd all pack everything up into the bus, and we'd make a jump to the next town. And we toured all up and down the eastern half of the United States, all the way from New York on down to South Florida, and all the way west to Kansas City.
And did it feel like a family, or was it a job? Was it a job where you traveled together, or?
I mean, yes and no. The guy who did it comes from the mud show tradition of circus. So
what's mud show?
So mud show is like a circus show where the kind of outside of the track is just a field. And so the people in the front row are kind of almost sitting in mud. So it's like a cheap, small circus, and the traditional circus, and the margins are very thin. So the work is quite intense. You're often doing all of the different jobs. You're selling souvenirs in between your acts. You're packing up the tent like almost every night. So that's how he ran his school program. And as a family, it was a bit of an exploitative situation, to tell you the truth. Like, I was not super happy with that guy, but I learned so much about being a professional, showing up on time, doing the work every single day, learning not to complain, which as a street performer, I have not carried on that tradition because, we're a bunch of complainers.
That we are. But you say not to complain. Why don't you complain there? What would be the problem if you complained in that environment?
The operation was just too small, and the stakes were too high, and everybody was under a lot of pressure. So you can't really just go about whinging. You just break the whole operation. There's only 3 or 4 of us working on this whole thing. So there was no room for it, and it was just not considered professional to complain about things, even though it was quite crap. But it's made me grateful for literally every gig I've had since.
So do you think that gave you a really good foundation going on to the rest of your career?
It did. As much as I'm not a fan of the owner, I do appreciate the things that I learned there. I learned a work ethic. I learned that nobody was going to hand you anything in this business. And here's the thing that I actually learned. That I think, honestly, the most valuable thing I learned from that work experience was that the entertainment industry doesn't care about you. But I learned things at first from a cynical professional viewpoint, like not necessarily like, I think a lot of people come in with big stars in their eyes about the industry, and they're like, I have a beautiful artistic vision and I'd like to share that with the world, which is beautiful. It's beautiful, but it leaves you quite vulnerable to the very harsh realities of working as a professional performer. And I came in with this just cynical view that this is a business and you do the work and that's how you get ahead. And it doesn't matter necessarily the quality of the program, as long as you hit these marks and you hit these notes, you've got a show, you go and you do it in the next town. And so I was able to come to art later. And I never had this moment of disillusioning. I had this moment of illusioning, I guess. As I went through my career, I was able to learn to be vulnerable, to open up, to give to my audience, while also understanding that I had to protect myself physically and emotionally and financially from the harsh realities of the entertainment world. So I never had this moment of like, I care so much about art, but art doesn't care about me, which I think is quite a hard step for a lot of performers to go through.
Yeah, I can empathize with that. Where you come to creating a piece of artwork and you feel like you get an ability to change people through culture, and then you realize that it's not that. It's not built to be that.
And then some producer either doesn't hire you for some stupid reason, or you get fucked over, and you're like, why would you fuck me over? I'm such an artist, And it's like, well, because they suck. The business sucks. It's awful.
And so were you in a rush to get out of that situation? Were you unhappy in that situation?
I was, but I was also very young. I was 19 the first time I worked with him. And then I worked with him at like 20 and 22 again. So I was also like very modestly talented at the time. So it wasn't like I had a lot of options, I was like a big fish in a small pond. Like I had a lot of initial talent, but that initial talent when you're like, kind of like the shining star of like a very small group, that doesn't carry you into the real world when you get out there with people who have real talent, who've like really worked. So I didn't have like a lot of job opportunities available. So I went and I did it. I did like 3 tours with him.
Did you study in between that?
I didn't. So, well, in between I was going back to university. So I'd drop out, I would do tour, I would sign back up for another university, get a few more credits, and then I would, then I broke my leg and then I had to go back to university. And then I eventually made my way back into my original university and did the program again and did their shows. And as soon as I walked across the stage for university, I got in my car and drove to Colorado. And that's where my street performing career and my and the rest of my circus career really started to take shape.
So is that the first time you tried to do a street show? Is when you excuse me, when you drove to Colorado?
That didn't actually come for another few years. So when I first showed up in Colorado, there was a small group of professionals that I had like a vague connection to that were working in that area. And I started to get that same kind of work that I was talking about. Stilt walking. We did produce small shows ourselves, but I was too shy for the street. There was a good pitch there and almost everybody I knew had worked it a little bit. And I tried like 3 times in maybe 2005. So 2 years after I got to Colorado, I gave it a shot, and man, did I get murdered. Oh my God. It was the saddest thing. I will continue this in 1 second, but the radiator is gonna kill me. So I'll just hold on just a second. I'll be right back. Talk to yourself.
No problem. It's quite a common thing for people, especially who've worked on the stage, worked in gigs where people are coming to see you, to work on the street for the first time and be horrifyingly shocked that people will not give you their attention easily. I was just saying how a lot of people who come from the stage to the street get shocked at the fact that they're not given attention easily.
Oh God. Yeah. Oh man. It was so bad. So I went out there. I didn't think I would do well. I had a pretty good sense that I wouldn't, but I hardly had a show. I hardly even had a concept for a show. I just went out there and tried, and like by the end of my first attempt, I was just doing backflips and begging people to watch. I would like do a backflip, watch, do a backflip, and I'd be like, watch, and I'd get quite tired. And people still didn't watch. I made like $11 my first show.
There maybe was a thing of being too desperate for the attention, needing it too much.
I was so desperate. It was so bad. And so I quit, and I tried a bunch of things. I got booked for a show tour that fell through. I ended up back in Florida. A whole bunch of hurricanes happened. And then here's how I just fell ass backward into street performing. I was in Florida, broke. I was delivering pizza. I was working some like corporate gigs for some super shady companies. And then I get a phone call.
Why were the companies shady?
Because, well, 2 reasons. It's Florida and it's entertainment. So they did like knockoff Circus type shows. And it was the kind of company where he wouldn't pay you. Oh, he would pay you, but you couldn't cash the check until he told you. And he would have to give you like the signal that there was money in the account. Then you could cash the check. And sometimes that would be a month later. So yeah, that was super shady. That was such a shady company. And I got this call, and it was somebody looking for entertainers at a theme park in Colorado because they thought I still lived in Colorado. So then I left and I went back to Colorado, and I was originally doing walk around, and they were like, hey, what we need is somebody to do a show. So they asked me to change what I was doing to do an outdoor show. And then I wrote the first version, not the Cate Great show. I wrote just Cate Does a Street Show. And you're probably familiar with this format. It was a show that had about 17 finales. Like, it was like in a row. And the staging was like, hello, my name is Cate. I will do for you a trick. Thank you. That was such a great trick I did. And now I will do for you another trick. Yes, this is the trick. Yay. And another trick will come next. And it wasn't very good, but it got me, I did like 5 shows a day, 5 days a week for most of the summer. I must have done 200 shows. And by that time, I just was very confident on stage. I was confident in my ability to gather a crowd because it was an outdoor show. I mean, a very soft crowd. Like, you would gather a crowd no matter what. You didn't have to ask them for money. They would just stop and watch. So I think sometimes it's good to work in hard situations because that tells you what really works. But if the situation is so hard, you never know if anything works because you can't even get it started. So having that like very soft, like kind of warm, fuzzy cradle to start the show in, and doing so many of them, by the time they eventually ran into financial trouble and had to fire their entire entertainment department 3/4 of the way through the season, I was able to take that same show that I had built and I took it on the street. And it wasn't an immediate success, but it was immediately competent.
Was it different
working.
from when you began?
What's that?
The 200 shows, did the show change over those 200 shows and evolve and develop?
It did. It did, because I learned, I don't remember what was really in it, but I, every day was able to develop kind of a new bit and make up a new transition and kind of get more confident delivering the lines. And, obviously, like, you would see when a line bombs, and if it bombed over a certain amount of time, then you take it out and you put something in. So yeah, by the time I finished, I was able to do a show on the street, and I remember I did my first show and I made like $60. And I was like, this is great. I got a
Were you
job.
nervous? Were you nervous when you went to do the show for the first time? Did you suspect that it might be like what you'd experienced before you did the run?
I think I was a bit, but I was also, I had been living in Colorado for at least 3 years then, 2 or 3 years, and I knew the whole gang. So it wasn't like I was rocking up to a pitch where I didn't know anybody. They were my friends. The first year, they did definitely bully me off the pitch. Like, so we had some guys from New Orleans, and they bullied me off the pitch. And now, as I look back on it, fair play.
Why do you mean fair play, and how did they bully you off the pitch?
Well, they were just quite clear that I was wasting the pitch. Like, if I couldn't hold a crowd. I couldn't get a crowd.
Is this before the run or after the run?
This is before the run.
Shows. Okay.
This is after the 200 or before the 200 shows. And I wasn't ready. I wasn't prepared at all. And people on the pitch are out there making a living. They're working. And I'm out here half prepared, can't hold a crowd, asking to play in prime time. Like, no, like, I'm taking money out of people's hands because I could go work a side pitch and make just as much as I was on the main pitch. So I didn't like it at the time. I resented it because I think we all have to be a little delusional in the beginning. But now, as I look back on it, I agree.
And were they kind in the way they did it? Did they sit you down and say, look, you're wasting the pitch, you can work here, try here? Or was it more,
Some were, but some were coming in from New Orleans, and they're quite hard, that bit. They were pretty straightforward. They would play pitch games. They would definitely kind of be jerks about it. And but some of them were gentle.
No, carry on. Sorry.
Yeah, you were going to say when I came back?
Yeah, when you came back, was a similar thing happening? Did they give you pride of place then? You said there was a lot of friends on the pitch by this point.
My friends did. My friends respected me. They saw that the show was working and growing, because it very quickly went like, $60, $80, and then it broke $100. And I feel like, man, that first $100 show, what a feeling, right? Like, you feel like, oh my God, people like me. Like, I could do this. That's quite a lot of money. And once I got to that level, generally, I was respected on the pitch, but not necessarily respected, but like, accepted. It was acceptable. Like, you can hold a crowd, you're good there. But
in the UK, at least I've experienced, a lot of the pitches tend to be kind of little workshops. You'll come off from doing a show to go to the queue, and people will go, I like what you did there. I don't think that worked. Have you thought about trying this? Did you have a similar kind of experience?
Yes, because our pitch was a lineup pitch. And so you're just out there, you show up, you get in line, and it was a straight lineup. No, like, oh, I'm waiting for this place. It's a straight lineup. You show up, you go first. You show up in the middle, you go after the person who's performing when you show up. So sometimes you'd be waiting on the pitch for, like, if you were lucky, 4 hours between shows, sometimes like 5 or 6 or more hours between shows. So everybody's just kind of like sitting around in the corner, looking like scumbags, kind of up against, sitting on the concrete, kind of up against the wall off to the side of the pitch.
Smoking a cigarette, maybe drinking a beer.
Basically, although in Colorado they're quite liberal, so a lot of them were very clean living folks, but others were not. They were like,
and how
so
often
yeah,
are you
there was,
training
and
now?
my friends did help me grow my show, and they did help me get a lot better. And after that first season is when I weaseled my way into circus school. So from the theme park and from my street performing, I finally had enough money to go to circus school, and I I absolutely weaseled my way in.
Why did you say that?
Because they had auditions in like April, and I wrote to them at mid-August. They started their term in September. I wrote to them in mid-August. The school at that time was just on the cusp of becoming prominent, but it wasn't there yet. So they still had some people who were kind of like quasi-amateur, almost, like in the program. I guess they thought they were very serious, but when you looked at their work, you were like, you're maybe not as serious as you think you are. And so I just wrote to them. I wrote this like a passionate note of, hey, look, I'm 25 now. I'm going to be 26 soon. I really wanted my chance to go to circus school. So if you have any space, I would love to take it. And I sent in a video. They have a format for the audition video. Did not do that format at all. I made like a juggling video in the style of skate videos that was kind of popular in that early YouTube era. I edited all together, my like cool acrobatic tricks and all of my best juggling tricks, and like every skill I could think of, I put it all in this video, and it was like, please accept me. And they were like, we'll think about it. Okay. Can you be here in 2 weeks? And I was like, yes. Yes. So I packed up my whole car. I packed up my whole life, got in my car again, drove to Quebec City. I had high school French, which at that point was almost 10 years previous. So I could kind of read the street signs, but I did not speak French like in any way that could communicate with a human being.
And in
Showed
Quebec,
up at an apartment
is it
for people
mostly
I
French?
never met.
In Quebec, is it mostly French? Because I thought they were dual lingo, but is it just really French is the language they use there?
In Montreal, it's very bilingual, but in Quebec City, it's very French, especially once you get outside of the main tourist district. So it's very French, and all of my classes were in French. There was only maybe 2 native English speakers in any of my classes. I was the only American. One of the girls was quite lovely, and she would translate a lot of stuff for me, but she could speak French by that point. And so she just, she had friends, and she could speak French, and she could participate in life. And it was like just one person you don't want to, I don't know. So I had to learn very quickly. Otherwise I was just going to be, I could be okay in classes, but I would just be completely excluded from like general social life at that point. Largely because. How
did you feel when you first arrived then? When you first arrived, did you feel that isolation? Did you feel a bit lonely and a bit kind of a bit left out of the all the people meeting each other and forming their bonds?
It wasn't so much when I just arrived, because there were people here and there who spoke enough English and were comfortable enough. Because other people can speak a little English, but they're quite shy about it, like you would be if you barely had any, if you'd never really spoken with somebody in a language that you sort of studied in school. One-on-one people were quite lovely to me, but in group settings, I was just lost. I just didn't know what was going on, and there was quite a bit of isolation. And also, I was talking earlier about humor, about being able to be funny. I just didn't have it. Even if I was able to speak with somebody in English, they wouldn't necessarily have a strong enough English to get the joke. And that was the loneliest part, I think, was because it was like losing an arm, not being able to tell jokes.
Yeah. And so you learned French quite quickly then?
I did. After the first year, I could have pretty basic conversations. In the second year, I could have fairly fluent conversations. And the third year that I was just hanging around Quebec after I had finished circus school, I was able to make jokes. And that to me, like, it's like, it's essentially like gradually going from black and white to color TV, like the more and more understanding of what's going on around you.
And how was you work-wise when you first arrived? Because you've done a lot of work as an entertainer, as a juggler. You've probably developed quite a decent set of skills. You've trained in a circus. Did you go there full of confidence, thinking, I kind of know it all already, or?
I didn't think I knew it all because I had worked with people who were higher level than me in the past, and I knew what my level was. I thought I was a good entertainer, but my style was so rough. It was so self-taught. There's just a lot of rough corners on it. And I walked in there and I saw the things that people could do, and it was just incredible. They were so good. There were so many people that were just so good. And all of a sudden, I went from being quite a skilled juggler in my peer group to being just middle of the pack at best. And there's something really inspiring about that. Like it can be really disheartening if you're not prepared for it, but it can also be super inspiring. You can look around and be like, okay, now it's time to get serious,
And is that how you took it? Did you feel inspired by being, middle of the pack and able to strive to be better and have people in front of you could see were showing you it was possible?
Yeah, I did. I mean, I was still quite young. I had quite a lot of depression issues and insecurity issues that came up. So I was very hard on myself, but I was hungry for it. And I just worked as hard as I could. And I put in hours. The original and the first year program that I was in, the preparatory program, the classes were 5 hours a day. And I would come in early and leave late. I'd just be out there like doing handstands, juggling by myself. And they actually gave me like a little superlative award, like at the end of the year, they have like best, most improvement, whatever. And I got the autonomy award, the autonom, basically I work on.
Wow, that was a surprise. I didn't expect that. I'll be messaging Cate in a sec. How fascinating is this? The question I was going to ask her was, because I've had depression in my life, and when I'm depressed, I don't leave the house. I don't get out of bed. So I'm so surprised that Cate's struggling with depression, but at the same time as struggling with that, she's able to drive herself to work hard, and not just hard, but harder than everybody else in the class. I assume before she disconnected that's what she was about to say, was this reward was the hardest working person in class. Sorry, everyone, just going to paste the address. I find that incredible, the way people can use their, well, I'm going to find out in a minute whether she did or not, but use depression to drive you instead of using it to drive you into the ground. Maybe that's the individual characteristic that made Cate great. Let's see, I think Cate's back in the feed. Okay, I think we have Kate. Lovely, ready to join. There we go, and we're back.
I'm back.
Yes.
I can still hear you. I was gone.
Yeah, so one of the things I was saying, you can hear me now. Does it sound okay? Lovely. You said that you struggle with depression, and I've been depressed in my life. You know, I've had things that have gone for a prolonged time that have kind of dragged me under the ground. And I don't leave my room when I'm depressed. You know, I close off the world. And you're working harder than anyone else in your course, it sounds like. It's still battling this. And I'm interested in that. I'm interested in how you're using that feeling to drive yourself to work harder, if I'm correct in thinking that.
So there's kind of two things going on there. One is I'm not just struggling with depression. I'm struggling with kind of a bipolar 2, which is, it's not quite bipolar where I don't, when I'm hypomanic, I don't quite lose touch with reality, but it feels exactly like depression, but in reverse. So instead of feeling like, when you feel terrible about something bad happens, you feel terrible about yourself, but then you feel like you're a failure and everybody hates you and nobody likes you. The opposite of that kind of happens where you feel like, you feel good, you feel amazing, you feel like everybody loves you, you feel super charismatic, you feel beautiful, you feel like admired. And so those waves of mania would really drive me to push myself very, very hard. And then there was so much self-loathing and self-doubt that the way that I dealt with that, and I think this is true in a lot of jugglers and a lot of people who do acrobatics and different things. It's like, if you can achieve a technical skill, like whatever else you think, nobody likes you, you're worthless. If you can achieve a technical skill, you can at least point to that. You're like, well, everyone hates me, but I can juggle 5 balls. You know that about yourself. The unfortunate part about that is like when you can't achieve the technical skill you want, you feel like a monster and that nobody likes you and that you're not good for anything. But as long as you keep training, you can keep feeling that sense of accomplishment and worth. And then also when you're juggling or doing handstands, like you can't really be sad because you have to focus on immediately what's in front of you. You have to focus on your juggling so you don't think about all of the things that are bothering you in your life.
Yeah. And so just to move it on to the studies again, were you creatively being nourished in that environment? Was your idea of what it is to perform changing?
God, yes. I love that new Circus Quebec style. I loved it so much. I had come from a very traditional background, so there's a bit of a conflict there, but I also, God, I loved seeing for me, that Quebec style is just the right mix of the American style, traditional circus, and the European style. It's still like, it's not quite so esoteric that it's like one person with a flickering fluorescent light bulb and one juggling ball for 45 minutes. But it's also not so tacky that like there's no storyline, there's nothing that brings it together, there's nothing, there's something that links all of the tricks and it gives it a nice fluid flow to the act and context, and you can follow it, but also still it's just like, I can do a backflip, so watch me. I loved that blend. And I learned a lot. I learned a lot about stage presence. I learned a lot about in addition to our technical classes, we also had dance, and we had theaters, and we had theater classes, as well as conditioning and stretching classes. So everything I did, I still had that core of what drove me to be a performer, but everything I did got a lot more refined. And I did want to leave the street. I never imagined myself as a street performer in my life. I was doing street performing to make money.
But why would you not imagine yourself as a street performer? I'm sure you could have just not imagined yourself, but was there a feeling behind it? Perhaps what's the right word? A pessimism on the life of a street performer or the status of a street performer?
On the status of the street performer, I wanted to do real circus. I wanted to be a real circus star. I wanted to be in Cirque de Main. I wanted to be in the lights. I wanted to be on the big stage. I really, really, really wanted to do that. And street performing to me was just how I made money to pay for circus school. And I didn't enjoy a lot of the shows that I was seeing. I hadn't traveled and seen international shows at that point. So I didn't necessarily like love all of the shows that I had seen.
Was that because they were just mechanical, you know, I'm going to gather people, then I'm going to do just enough that you will feel prepared to pay me money for it?
A bit, yeah. And that's not to say that the people that I worked with weren't good. Like we had Derek was on our pitch, and he just has a magical show. It was pretty stocky at the time. He'll even admit that. But it was magical to watch the way that he transformed a crowd from a group of strangers to a group of people who were being a part of something that was happening. That was an amazing feat to me of performance when I would watch it. But yeah, I didn't respect it. I think I was closed to the possibilities of the art form. And I developed very artistic acts. Like you showed my Rolla Bola act, which I developed more recently. But before that, I also used to have this handstand and juggling act where I would mix handstands with large juggling balls and roll them from foot to foot. Unfortunately, I graduated circus school right exactly at the time of the financial crash. And a lot of those circuses and cabarets were only hiring people that they knew, people who had 2, possibly even 3 acts. And I had 1 act and 1 street show. And those were not, I couldn't do the 2 in the same market, you know? So
did you feel disheartened? Did you leave expecting to run into this huge world of performance and find that as you left, it kind of receded?
Yeah, I struggled. I had a few great things that happened. I had a wonderful tour across Canada with that circus act with Cirque Sublime. I was a finalist in the Circus Princess Circus Festival that happens in Sweden. I was part of a house troupe for a Cirque du Soleil special events contract.
Wow.
That was 5 months, but I was basically a glorified acrobatic extra in this show. But that was a lovely contract. I learned quite a lot about performing and doing makeup and doing makeup a lot. And so I did have some success, but it was so few and far between that I found myself kind of broke and overweight for a hand balancer, sort of stranded at my family's house in Florida.
How did you feel about your life?
Prospects. What's that?
How did you feel about your life at that point?
Not great. No. Wasn't having a good time. I eventually went back and did a school contract with that guy, but he had lost so many bookings because of the financial crash that he kind of put the tour on pause, and I was not rehired when he started again. And that was probably both him and both me.
Did it feel like it's going to sound really harsh saying this, but did it feel like you'd failed to go back to the school tour?
Yes and no. I don't know if, not to label it like an abusive situation, but maybe there's just something when you're in a sort of exploitive situation where you kind of always imagine like, this time I'll do it right. You know, there's like you could go back, but no, if I just do it right this time, if I just play by the right rules, if I just, I could do it right, and I could really show how much I've grown with circus school and all of that. And I came back to it, and it turned out that we were the same people. And it was not a pleasant experience. So what I was in a huge funk, and what I eventually did was I took a job as an usher in Cavalia, which is a circus show. And I took that job, even though it was minimum wage, because I knew that it would only last 6 weeks at the most. It would be enough money to get me out of that situation. And it was still working in the circus industry. And so I worked, and before I went to work every day, I would get there super early because traffic to Miami was murder. So it was either go 3 hours early or go 2 hours early, but spend 2 hours in traffic. So I would go like 3 hours early. I would get there. I would train outside of the big top and just like train and train and train, get myself back in shape, get the juggling back. And then at night and when I had days off, I took a little notebook and I just wrote and wrote and wrote and wrote. I wrote an entirely new street show from scratch, and I developed a character, and I took all of the things that I had learned from circus school, and I put all of that extra refinement and that character development, and I put that into a street show structure. Because at that time I knew the street show structure, but I didn't like a lot of street shows. So what I did is I took the structure and I just like clawed out all of the content. Took out all of the content and I put in content that I liked, that I had written. Because I really had become convinced that if you can make 3 knives on a rollabola, which I do, if you can make 3 knives on a rollabola a finale, right? Why not a one-handed handstand? It's the same technique to sell the trick, right? You can make any stupid trick, 3 torches on a rollabola. You can make that look like the most impressive trick in the world. So what if you take a trick that is like actually impressive and use the same build-up techniques to make that trick palatable to the audience, to make them appreciate it? Because no, they don't appreciate just raw skill. Like they appreciate it for about 30 seconds, like you would appreciate a guitarist on the street. Right? Like they're like, oh yeah, this is really amazing and you must practice very hard. Cool. I have to go grocery shopping. So I took that and I just wrote this show, and I eventually had enough money that I went down to Key West and I just showed up. I just showed up in Key West, no money, barely any money, nowhere to stay. I showed up for the draw and was like, does anyone have a place you can keep me? And Stickman came through. Sticky let me stay at his place for free, and I went out and I worked and I got crushed. Because the lottery was very like tiered and you never got a good spot if you were new. And sometimes you didn't get any spot at all. So I just got murdered by the like scumbags who were both working and the audience in Key West. And you know, scumbags, I love you. I love you, scumbags. So don't take that poorly. But I just got killed by both the performers and the audience. And I just went back out there and I did it again and I did it again and I did it again. And eventually Cate Great, like I had a costume, I had a concept. Eventually she just started to click enough that I made enough money that I went back to Quebec City to the circus school, trained even more to build my skills. And I got a couple of little gigs there and eventually found my way back to the pitch in Colorado. And when I got to Colorado, the show just took off.
Can we just pull you back a little bit for this? So one of the things I was interested in listening to this is you wrote down your street show.
Mm-hmm.
It is not what most street performers do. You sat outside of a street pitch, filled out something, and then a few weeks later went and applied it. When you went to apply it, did the writing stuff work for you? And why did you feel like this was the way to develop it? Was that something you did in studying which brought that method out?
So I didn't write it as in write the entire script. I wrote jokes. I wrote bullet points. I wrote the idea for the character. So I wrote who she was, what she wanted out of life, like just the way I formed the way that she would interact with the world. And from there, once I decided kind of who she was and had a clear idea of who she was, from there, the comedy came. Because she has a particular worldview and it's not quite the same as everybody else's. It's related to mine, but it's not the same as mine. There's a lot that's different. So once I had this concept, I was able to write jokes that were related to the concept, and then I was able to improvise off of that. So I do script a show in a sense that it's about half scripted. I have segments, I have jokes, and I have points I want to hit, but everything in the middle is improvised.
And when you first tried to do that on was it Key West you're at?
Key West, yeah.
And you've got the crap draw, you're the first, the youngest person, or the youngest in terms of their, age-based hierarchy that they've got there, how long you've been there. So you get in the crappy pitches. How did it work? What was the feeling of trying this new character for the first time?
It sort of worked. Are you playing with my gain or is that me? I don't know.
No, that's you. That's you.
That's me. Okay, I don't know what's happening. It kind of worked. It kind of, look, you can't take new material out and just expect it to work. So it was new material, and a lot of it missed, but some of it hit. Enough of it hit that it encouraged me. And I don't know. There's something about entertainers. We're so hungry that we'll take that little crumb and we'll just follow it. So I knew that it could work. And that's why when I got back to the place that I was staying on a couch at Sticky's, I had my notebook and I'd write, I'd cross out jokes that bombed. I'd rewrite jokes that if I thought they were salvageable, and I'd try to write new jokes, and then I'd try them out. And some of them worked and some of them didn't. And it was a process of years.
And were the people in Key West being supportive? Were they trying to help you to develop this character?
I don't think they were paying too much attention to me in terms of like developing the character, but they were, I would say that about half of them were supportive, and like those tended to be the festy types, the folks that were there and they were traveling and they did the international circuit. And then there's another half that's the streety types. It's street performing. It's like some quasi homelessness. There's the people that have been there for a long time and were super protective of their space and would play pitch games. I do have to
say this: you can't point at them and say quasi homeless when you're sleeping on Tim's sofa.
Well, I was quasi homeless as well. Yes, fair enough. But some of them were in a pretty bad way.
Well, that's the thing about the street, I suppose. It's an avenue for people who have the least social credit. Always go on the street and do something.
Yeah, it's it's the wonderful thing and the terrible thing about street performing is that it has a low barrier to entry. It's accessible to everyone. It's accessible to all the performers. It's accessible to all audiences. But it's a group of people and there's money involved. And so there's going to be competition. There's going to be protective. There's going to be people being protective. There's going to be, and some people are vicious about that. Never like outright. I don't think anybody was ever outright mean to me, but it was like subtle. It was kind of like really subtle things like, oh yeah, you should take this spot, or, oh, I'll do one show and then you can go right after me and you can be on that pitch. And then they'd do one show and they'd be like, actually, I'm going to do 2 shows. And then you wouldn't get to work it all that night. Or like, just kind of that kind of stuff where you found yourself maneuvered out of a spot and you're like, I thought you were going to let me know. Okay. All right.
It's quite from what I found in the UK, at least, it's quite an old school thing. A lot of the old hands will try and either get you too drunk that night so you can't work the next day, or they'll do the maneuvers you described. Yeah. Lovely people.
Yeah. It makes it interesting, right?
And so did you become a bit harder to it? Did you start becoming more cynical about your interactions with the guys down there?
I'd always been quite protective of myself because I grew up in Florida in the 80s and 90s during the crack boom. And pretty much everybody out there, this delightful, feminine, like relaxed exterior that you see now is not what I had in my 20s. I was very intense. People were quite intimidated to be around me, to tell you the truth. Not like the hardened streeties, but like people who, jugglers who didn't know me. They were quite shy to approach me because I had this like huge fuck you attitude. Hard to believe, I know. But I was always very, very protective of myself. But at the same time, it was still happening. I was still getting outmaneuvered. And you know what? As I've gone through this career and I've moved up through the ranks, I think that's fair to say, I've realized that, it sucks, like all of the pitch games and all of those, like all of that maneuvering, but there are people who make $200,000 a year in offices, and they steal each other's lunch out of the fridge. These people have like, multiple degrees and are professionals at the top end of their profession, and they're still stealing each other's lunch, or like gossiping about each other, or like maneuvering each other into like out of promotions. So I think it's just people and money, and there's no way to get around it. And at least on the street, it's very straightforward. Like, I think that you're weak, I'm going to do my show on top of you. Now your show is good enough, you're going to shut me down. So I'm not going to go at the same time as you. And for me, I didn't take that as discouragement. I took it as encouragement to build a show that was big enough that if somebody tried to mess with me, I would shut them down. And even though I have this like cutesy, very inviting character, at a certain point, like when performers would go up with me, my show got strong enough that I shut them down, and then they left me alone.
Do you think that's beneficial? And you sort of inferred that, but do you think that's the right environment we should have?
No, it's terrible.
But it made you strong.
It did.
I'm not saying we should have that environment, by the way, but since we're playing through these ideas, it made you strong.
It did. But it's only now that I'm comfortable that I realize the cost of that. That not everybody comes through the cynicism. And, after over a decade on the street and 2 decades in the circus, I've gotten to see the arc of other people's careers. And I came to a place where I'm very happy and I'm very satisfied with my work. And I've come to a place where I'm comfortable enough that I don't feel like I need to fight to prove myself anymore. But not everybody gets to that spot, and sometimes as people start to fade, they grab on harder, and they just become more and more bitter. They turn to alcohol, or they fight more. They'll fight people for those primetime spots, and they get angry at their crowds for not paying them as much as they used to get paid, because they've lost that charisma that made them so wonderful when they were younger. And so I think that those kinds of games and that kind of harshness ultimately weakens our art overall. And it destroys people. Matt, like, how many people have you seen in this business that are broken? Just broken.
Especially people who spend their entire life on the street and become the exact people you're talking about. They have successful careers in their youth, and it's like sand through an hourglass. They come to a point where there's nothing left in the hourglass, and they're still holding on, and drugs and alcohol and all sorts of different things help them deal with the crush of that.
Yeah. So it worked for me. I found a way to thrive in that system. But, how many... There is a danger, because I have seen acts that are in a supportive pitch, but they shouldn't be on the street, or nobody's told them, like, hey, we like what you're doing, but if you want to do this, you have to work harder, or you can't be here. And nobody tells them that, and they don't. And then they get frustrated. But at the same time, how many people who could have had brilliant careers got bullied off the street and left? And how much... Do
you think there's a thing with creativity? The fact that because it's such a jockeying environment, that it doesn't give the room for people to be creative and to try and make different formulas and test them out and develop them. And they could work in the end, but they need that chance to develop. Yeah.
I mean, I was really fortunate that I had that incubator of both circus school and the theme park gig, where I could work without pressure. But yeah, I mean, how many people show up on the street and see, like, hey, your show's not working, your idea is stupid, do these things, and they go, oh, I guess I will. And then they do those things and they work, and then you've just stamped out another formulaic show.
It's heartbreaking. You watch people with original ideas and you think, if you just spent a couple of years struggling, you'd have something special, but someone passes them a straitjacket and says, right, put this here, do this here, and they start and they make money, and we all need money to live, and then that dream is gone.
Yeah.
But let's get on to more positive subjects. I feel like we're just drowning our sorrows of the street. You said when you went back to Colorado that the show really worked, and you developed a character, and you developed a show structure with this character that was, well, you know, killing it.
Yeah, I mean, it was an instant success every show, but my hats were kind of coming in on average much higher than they had been before. I was developing a real relationship. That was when I was first starting to be able to develop a relationship with the audience. And here's the thing I learned at circus school was or maybe I didn't learn it at circus school, but I learned to listen to my audience. And I think that's something that is just missing from so many street shows.
What do you mean by that?
I talk to them. I talk to them directly, and I listen to the way they respond. And sometimes they respond with breath, I'll say something and that affects the way that they breathe, or with a laugh, and then sometimes they just say things, the show feels open enough that the audience just will say something to me, like something weird. I don't know. Somebody once said oh, well, now you're just showing off. And I was just like, yes, that's the whole point of all of this. And it got a huge laugh because then the audience knew that I was paying attention to them. And then they felt like they were there. When you are listening to your audience, instead of just being like, and now for my next trick, I'm going to do this. And here's a joke that somebody else wrote. And here's another joke that you've probably not heard before. And here's another, the audience is like, okay, I'm just receiving all of this information and it's just happening at me. So I can kind of pay attention or not, or I can come or go or be engaged or not. But if if you cough and the performer goes, doing okay? Whatever. That's not necessarily the best example, but if or if somebody moves around and you're like, hey, nice outfit, whatever, people are like, oh, she's paying attention to me. I'm a part of this. This is happening with me.
Is this the whole idea that you start treating interlopers into the work and things that interfere with the focus of the work as gifts, as opposed to being kind of interruptions and obstacles?
Yeah, you have to. It's not always that extreme, but you have to acknowledge the environment you're in, right? The people who are there watching your show, they're also in that same environment. They're seeing what's going on around you. So if you're not paying attention to it, I mean, yes, you can draw their focus to you, right? But if something breaks that focus, they know it. So yeah, you hear the trash guys coming and backing up, you take a pause and you look, and maybe you just say hey guys, thanks for taking the trash out, whatever. That's not particularly funny, but somebody says something weird, or a baby cries, and I go, I know, I'm scared too. People are like, oh my God, we're here, we're all here, we're in a real place and something is happening.
Yeah, exactly that. And they don't feel like passive members in the experience anymore because it's interactive.
To me, when that's happening, that's when I feel alive on the street. And there's just, that's what I love. Because I said originally, I didn't see myself as a street performer. I didn't take it seriously because I didn't see the beauty of the art. But the more I did it, and the more I did it in a way that I loved, the more beautiful it became to me. And there's just nothing like being on the ground, on the cobbles, right next to people, being able to, not now, reach out and literally touch your audience, talking to them one-on-one, everybody sharing the space together. It's so much harder to create that in a theater. And when it goes well, when there's just a massive crowd and you're like, I built this and we are in this together, there is nothing better in performance when it's like that. Just no feeling in the world comes close to that.
And what made you start looking at that and trying to work with that? Was it doing the shows, or did you see other people, or was it through conversations with people you started to grasp the idea that you need to be interacting with your audiences?
Yeah, I think it was Derek. Who was watching Derek. I just watched him, and there was something different about his show and the way that people responded to it from the other shows that we had on the street. And we had other acts that were quite good. But man, I just watched Derek go from a crowd that hated him and just grind and grind away. And by the end, everybody felt like they were friends. You know, and that was magical. And that was my quest in street performing, was to build a show that felt like that.
And so in Colorado, did you spend a lot of time there? Is that when you really developed, honed, and built the base for your future street career?
Yeah. So I came back to Colorado, so I was broke and out of work and ended up in Key West. That was the December 2009, January 2010. That's when Cate Great was kind of born. And then I guess it would have been the season of 2010, summer season of 2010 is when I went to Colorado, and it started to really, really take off. And I was living there. And then that next winter, I decided to build a kit that was that I could take on a plane, because my kit was like just some random boxes that I had that were made out of wood, didn't break down at all. I decided to build a kit that I could take on a plane, and I got on a plane and went to Australia. And that changed my life. That was 2011. What's that?
Why Australia?
Well, everybody told me, like, if you want to be a real street performer, you gotta go to Australia. And it was winter, and I had money for the first time, and I had some contacts in Australia. I knew a few people, and I wanted to go do Adelaide. And my timing was amazing, because it was the first year that they stopped doing the big pitch in the garden in Adelaide. And also they blocked off the main pitch on, was it Growler Street? I think the main pitch that everybody works in Adelaide, they blocked that off for the fringe events. So all it was like 2 side pitches and a bunch of like drunk, angry school children, essentially. Like, that was all we had to perform for. I got so screwed in the draw that I didn't get we drew for 3 weeks, and I didn't get a weekend spot until the 3rd week. So it was just weekdays and mean school children. Like, I dealt with teenagers before, but I'd never had school children that were like just this cruel to me. On the stage, I got murdered. It was so bad. It was so bad. But Stuart Every saw me getting killed out there on the street. He saw me and was like, "Hey, do you want to go to Dubai?" And I was like, "What is the matter with you?" Just like randomly coming up to the person on the street and like asking to go to Dubai in 2 weeks. And he was like, "Yeah, I got this gig there, and it's for half the money, because I've already booked most of the cast, and I think you'd be great. I could tell that you're good from your show, even though you're getting killed." And I was so desperate at the time. I asked Sam Wills, I was like, "Is this Stuart guy like gonna kidnap me?" And he was like, "No, it's legit." I was like, "Okay, just Stuart, will the clap for me?" And Stuart said yes. And I was like, "Okay, I'm going to Dubai." So I finished out the run in Adelaide, and I had a great time there. I was doing so badly that in my hour time slot, instead of doing a show, I would just do 2 finales. I would like build, finale, had it, build, finale, had it. And that way I was able to pay my bills, pay my hostel room, and eat, and have enough money that I rented a car with a friend, and we toured the Great Ocean Road, which was phenomenal. And then I went to Dubai with Stuart and Andrew Brown, the photographer, who shot Fringe for a very, very long time. He was there, and he shot my show, and he took beautiful pictures, just beautiful pictures. And because he was connected to everybody in the world on Facebook, everybody saw my show. Like, all of the major people in the business saw who I was. They saw the images of my show, and those images helped me get my first busker festival back in the States. And it helped me get my second.
Just before we move on to that, how did you feel when you were in Australia?
Oh my God. I really wondered, what is my life? Like, I had a great time though. The Australian crew is fantastic. I met Idris. I met Idris and Josh, and I don't think I met Hannah at the time. I met Cormac and the lads from, what is their show called? I'm talking about the Irish guys.
I do know them, but I'm trying to remember the name of their show. I remember their show. They do it in hot pants, don't they? If I remember correctly.
And we are actually good friends, and I'm blanking on the other one's name, and I think I'm actually closer friends with him, and I can't remember it, and I feel terrible, and please don't murder me. But
want to help us out in the comments, you're welcome.
I know. But I made such great friends there, like lifelong friends.
Did you feel like you were part of the kind of street performance fraternity now? By this point now, you're like, I'm here.
I did, and I did also. I might have been a bit annoying at that point too, because I was like, I just was like going to everybody I could see, and I was just like, but I am good. I am good. No, I have a show. I can do hats. I can make a good hat. Like, but it really, like, and everybody was like, yeah, we know, we believe you. We believe you. Like, just calm down and have a beer. And I was like, all right, yeah, I'll have a beer. And it sounds like I'm 24 at this point, but I'm not. Yeah. I was like 30.
But you're kind of 24 in street performer years.
I was.
Yeah. And how did it feel to go to Dubai after that then? Were the shows big and nice, and was the city and the culture an interesting thing to be part of?
Oh my God. Well, those are two very separate things. The Dubai was lovely. It was like going to a spa, doing shows there, because compared to like school children who would just shout at me until I quit, it was a festival setting. There was a bit of a language barrier, so I had to like simplify things, and there were some things that I had to do that would have been a bit inappropriate, so I had to do a little bit of editing of the show. But I had big crowds, big easy crowds, no work. I could do what I wanted. I could play with the people. I was getting applause. I had a hotel room that was all mine and clean. And I was clean in between shows. It was just wonderful. And the crew was amazing. We had Mike Dada was there with us doing balloons. Tom Ward was there for a little bit doing guitar before he decided he had a better gig. JP was there. That was when I first met him. God, Herbie Treehead was there. It's just such an excellent group. Every single person was just a wonderful performer. And then there I felt like I was a part of the fraternity. There I really felt like I was a part of the crew, and that I had kind of made it. And for the second part of your question, yeah, the culture in Dubai was, I think that was one of the first times I had traveled to a place that was really quite different. There's a lot that's westernized, but the ways that it's westernized is quite surprising. It's just in a place where there was so much luxury around, and then so much under the rug poverty. It was wild to see. And so many chain stores, and everything was hyper modern. Like, America, I love you, but we are falling apart. Like, our infrastructure is like falling in. And in Dubai, everything was like gleaming and beautiful and super, super modern. And there was always somebody there to take care of you. And we went into the old market, and the buildings were different. It was just, yeah, it was quite a good experience for me generally. But I was also always terrified the entire time that I was there, because at that point I had still had an M on my passport when I was traveling. Like, I looked like this, and I had and I had my name changed legally at that point, but I still had that M on my passport, and I was like, this is fine. This is fine. Unless it's not, and then it's really not fine. And then it's really, really not fine. So I was quite cautious about pretty much everything I did. When the guys would go out drinking, like, I was broke. I had no money. And if you try to drink in Dubai, it's extremely expensive. So I had no money. So, and also, man, to be like a intoxicated woman on the street in Dubai is not a great idea. So I was just sitting in these airy, breezy cafes, doing these huge shows for people, thinking this is so wonderful. I could be arrested.
Yeah,
So-
I could imagine it's ever present, the worry there. You know, it's not like the worry would pass until you're out of the country.
What's that?
I said it's the worry for that, because of the context, is ever present. You know, until you leave the country, perhaps.
Yeah, well, entering and leaving the country were those scariest parts. Because at that point, I was quite used to passing, like, aside from some very mean school children on the streets, in Adelaide, who just questioned my gender until I like left and cried. People generally didn't question my gender. Maybe they had questions, but like the way I carried myself didn't lend itself to being open to receiving those questions. So I lived quite a normal life. So for me, everything was fine until it wasn't, right? Like everything is fine until that one border agent sees the M on your passport and decides that it's just a little bit too suspicious and then sends you back from Canada to the United States. But otherwise it's fine. Nobody notices it until they do. Then you're fucked. So there was not many interactions that I would have day to day in Dubai where I would be worried about being found out, other than situations where I'd have to show my passport. And yeah.
Well, that's just a strange situation to be worried about being found out. It seems obviously alien to myself in a way, you know?
Well, that was, I mean, the stakes were not as high as being arrested in the Middle East, but that was my entire career. I transitioned in Boulder in 2004. And I was very fortunate that the people in Boulder were like probably at least 10 to 15 years ahead of the rest of the country in terms of acceptance. And I was able to start working just a few months later. I was able to start working as female, and I had some friction and some problem, but the crew was very nice and very generous. And when I went away to circus school, I just didn't tell people. So in the street performing world, I'd never done a street performing show under my previous name. I have always been a female street performer. I've not always been a female presenting circus performer, but I've always been a female street performer. But in the crew was super nice. But after that, I didn't really let the information spread through the circus world. I didn't tell anybody in circus school. And then as I traveled the world, I didn't tell any of the other street performers, only when someone became a very close friend of mine. But every person that I dated, every person that I decided to tell was like one more kind of leak, one more potential leak where the information could get out. And there was always quite a bit of underlying stress. And there was always a worry about being found out. And there was always a worry about what that would mean. Because now people are quite progressive, especially artists. But in 2005, even 2010, 11, 12, it could ruin your career, or people could use it against you. And I knew that people were spreading rumors to kind of undercut me as well in certain places. So
Is there a thing of perhaps changing context? It changed the context of who you are in people's eyes in some way.
If they knew. Yeah, because I didn't transition to be trans. I transitioned to be myself, to be a woman. And at the time, now there's more understanding. And I felt comfortable coming out in this September because I feel like the world has really changed. And I also feel like my reputation is strong enough that people knowing this about me now doesn't change the way they see me necessarily, because they have such a clear image of who I am. But at the time, I was so new to the industry, and I was so new to even myself, and the world was so different that, yes, I was really worried that all of my work would be seen through the lens of being a transgender performer. And I didn't want to be a cabaret novelty act, Eddie Izzard has had a phenomenal career, and seeing Eddie perform gave me hope that if nothing else, if I wasn't passable, or if I wasn't good looking, or if I, if nothing else, I could have a career by just owning it. But it wasn't what I wanted for my career. I just wanted to be a regular female street performer, and I fought for that like every inch. And I knew at the time that if people knew my history, they would just think of me that little bit different. I call this the handshake hug paradigm, where everybody's hanging out and somebody leaves and they give a hug to all of the women, like, oh my gosh, it's so nice to see you. Oh my gosh, it's so nice to see you. And when they know your history, they go, hey, good to see you, pal. So they respect you as a person, and they'll even be friends with you, but they never quite see you as a real woman. And so, yeah, I was terrified that would be the best case scenario. The worst case scenario is someone punches you in the mouth. Well, that's not the worst, but that's at least that's a less fun.
It's up there.
Yeah, they punch you in the mouth, or they just like undercut you with clients, and they just like tell everybody, and they try to get you fired from like. I do quite a lot of like wholesome family events. My character is very wholesome. Like, don't fuck with me when I'm on the street, but my character is very charming and inviting and nice. Like, I don't want to do late night drunk cabaret shows. I don't want to be like pigeonholed, stuck there. I want to perform for families and regular people. And so I was really worried that I would lose that whole market. I would lose the Middle East. I would lose the Midwest. I would lose like family shows, city shows, fairs, festivals. Like, if that got out, yeah, I was terrified the whole time.
And it sounds like that's a past tense kind of situation.
And it's only very recent. Actually, I don't know. I came out during the pandemic, so I don't know. But I think starting in the mid 2010s, there's just this huge cultural shift. And, you got Orange is the New Black, you've got Transparent, you've got all of these shows where trans people are actually playing trans people on TV, and the general public is getting to see us as human beings. And so now I think trans people have always had this ability where like somebody tells you you're transitioning, and you like change their gender, you change you're just, even if they don't pass, like you switch your impression of that person in your mind. And it's not that hard. But for me, I think until the last 5 years, cisgender people just were not capable of that, just not capable of making that distinction. But now I think they can. And now I think a lot of places want diversity. And I think now instead of being seen as like a novelty to be tolerated, which I've seen a lot of famous trans performers before me, I think that actually I'm kind of a role model. Like, people are impressed with it, with what I've done. And I never thought I would see that.
It must be a wonderful thing to have to live through a life of worry to some extent with this, and to feel like you need to withhold, to now feel like not just can you be relaxed in your own skin, but at the same time you feel like you can help other people.
I feel better about myself and better as a performer than I ever have in my whole life. Like, it's amazing. Yeah, I worry about the anonymity that I lost like a little bit, I don't know what the real world consequences are going to be of this as we go through the system, but yeah, I always had to change my past when I talked about it, right? Like, a little boy that plays baseball, not unusual. Little girl that plays baseball, it's a whole thing. Like, it happened, but it changes me from being like one of everyone to like, whoa, that was very special. And so now I feel like I have my whole life back. I have my whole life from the beginning to now. And it's quite incredible. And also, like, I don't know, man, maybe it'll be easier for me to date in the future when I don't have to worry about like dating being that like end of my career.
Yeah. So you're talking about career. You said that when you're in Dubai, this really pushed your career up.
It did.
And we're up to the last 22 minutes. So I think it'd be quite nice at the end. We can talk about the blossoming of your street career.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, after Dubai, I came back. I got the Lawrence Busker Festival, which that was their 4th year of doing it. So I was new to Busker festivals, and they were kind of new. They'd only had 3 previous. And Lawrence is a town that's very similar to Boulder, very artsy, very liberal, very hippie. So all of my very obscure, very dry jokes like killed there, did great. And that just propelled me. I got Waterloo, and Waterloo went fine because I was then playing in the big leagues. You know, I wasn't like the biggest show. I was still quite new to the festival circuit, and everybody was so good. So I just like came in the middle of packing Waterloo, but I met all of these amazing performers. And then the next couple of years, the next year after that is when I finally decided to move to Boston. And John Higbee encouraged me. What's that?
Did the show stay the same as what you kind of forged and really started working in Colorado? Did that show travel with you, or did it change and morph as you started going to these different environments and festivals? Because festivals aren't the same as the street.
No, they're not. And actually the first time, because Boulder is an unamplified pitch. So I had a microphone, but I talked into it like you would talk into, like not as loud, but in the same kind of very slow, clear delivery that you would talk into, to, project out to the crowd. And that gave me quite an odd delivery style. And then as I got better, I was able to add music. I was able to change my delivery. I still have a distinctively slow delivery, and they make fun of me and call me the William Shatner of street performers, which I then wrote into a joke because it's just great. But I did start to speak more normally. Every year I've worked on this show, I've changed it. Not dramatically. Some of the jokes that are there have still been in the show since 2010 or 2009. But every year is a new joke. Every year is a new bit. Every year, just a constant refining. But the core of Cate Great, of who she is and what she wants, has stayed the same. But yeah, the props have evolved.
Has the structure stayed the same? The characters stayed, but have you changed structurally what you're doing? Have you changed the stunts, the way the stunts work? Sorry, I'm having to mute for you. I'm on a boat. The boat's hitting the side like this continuously, so I'm tactically trying to mute the microphone so I don't bang while you're chatting. So did the structure of the show change?
So I've always had, since I wrote Cate Great, I've had 3 parts of the show: the intro, the middle trick, and then the finale. The intro has always been a bit of like jokes and setup, like fancy setup, street performer style. Jokes, fancy setup, juggling, a quick 3-ball juggling routine to kind of bring the audience together. And then the middle trick has always been a mixed object, or just a juggling on the rollabola trick of some kind. And that has changed as the show has grown and as my rollabola skill has increased. But the concept is to start on the ground with the people, talking one-on-one with the folks. Before I go onto my first table, I have 2 tables. One is for rollabola and the other has handstand canes on it. And for the finale, after I finish the rollabola trick, I actually take that second table with the rollabola, with the handstand canes on it, plunk that on top of the first table. And that's where I stand up on top and do, I stand on the handstand canes and juggle 5 balls, do a neck catch, and then I do a 1-arm handstand. And the idea to build the show that way is that the beginning starts on the ground with the people, like gathering and bringing them in. The second trick has always stayed a rollabola trick because on the rollabola, I'm able to do something that has tension and is dangerous, but I'm still looking at the crowd. I can still see them. We can make eye contact. I can tell jokes. I can work with my volunteer. And that way, I'm able to solidify them and make them into one whole crowd. Because for the finale, for the handstand, I'm going to be very high on top of people, above people, which is great for getting the hat line because more people can see you. But also juggling 5 balls, I'm looking here, and then doing a one-handed handstand, I'm looking here. Well, I guess technically I'm looking like this, but both of those skills, the audience loses my face, right? So that when your show is not very good, I have learned when your show is not very strong, that's a real good moment for the audience to like, you know, because you stop looking at them, you lose that eye contact. So they really have to love me, and the exact things I do in those sections has changed. The exact jokes that happen in those sections have changed, but the structural idea of that has stayed the same. As I've gone, I first did a mixed object juggle on a rollabola, like a knife, a torch, and a stuffed puppy. I love that stuffed puppy. Then for Faneuil Hall, you're not allowed to use fire. You're not allowed to use fire in the city of Boston. So it was then a knife, a hatchet, and a stuffed puppy. And then I eventually moved up to stacked rollabola. So I did one roller and 2 vertical stackers, one on top of the other. And that was quite sketchy and looked great. But it was too delicate for me at the time to be able to do the hatchet, and the stuffed puppy was too unpredictable to catch. So I didn't really want to be lunging for it while I was on the street. So I dropped that and just did 3 regular machetes. And these days I have 2 rollers and 2 boards. And I do the double rollabola, and I tell people, like, I promise you won't be too bored. I love it. My show is charming, man. It's not a mean show. And I'm mean, but the show is not mean. And now I do like a bit where the top cylinder and board, I kick that away and land on the bottom one after I do the juggle, and then I kick that away, and it's just like, it's like, oh, it's such a great punctuation going into the finale. You know, it's like, now next is my finale, but first, how do I get down? Wham, wham, wham. It's just like, oh, just like really brings that whole bit together. I love it. But that was only 3-4 years ago that I put that in the show. Yeah.
And why do you think from Dubai you got the pictures? The pictures were sent out everywhere, so people got a sense of who you were. But that's not just the route to success. Why do you think you became so successful in festivals after that?
Well, it still did take some time to make inroads. I mean, I got those first 2 festivals, and then I did like 1 or 2 festivals a year, and the street was still going pretty well at that point. But it's a slightly different show. I wouldn't say it's like, it's not as wildly creative as like Gilly or some of these insane, like Anthony Living Space. Like, it's not, but it is a technical show. It's beautiful visually. It has a unique character. At the time, there were very few handstand shows. Everything was like unicycles and juggling and unicycles or ladders. So now there are more circus school graduates looking for work, and I can't really blame them, because that's kind of what I did, even though I was on the street first. So there weren't very many handstand shows. There's nobody that really looks like me. Well, now there's more people with red and stars, but like at the time, it was a unique look, it was a unique show. It was a hole that needed to be filled.
And do you think you'll move back to doing circus again at some point, or do you feel settled in the place you found yourself?
I honestly, the video you showed at the start of the show was just from 2018. So I do have my indoor rollabola cabaret act. I am a real circus performer sometimes. But I don't care. Like, for me, all of this, I honestly don't care if it's juggling. I don't care if it's handstands. I don't care if it's rollabola. I don't care if it's indoor. I don't care if it's outdoor. If I can meet a crowd and make a connection with them, that's all I want. So I try to book circus gigs. I try to book street shows, street festivals. I try to book regular festivals, like local festivals. I try to book anything I can book. And an interesting thing I found, because I did the Christchurch Festival, and that was like the biggest festival in the world. And it was, at the time, everybody says it wasn't what it used to be, but even still, like, I realized, you know, I did Cirque du Soleil special events. I worked with people who did Cirque du Soleil. I kind of realized, like, an audience is an audience. I don't care if it's like the Pawtucket Arts Festival or the like St. Helens, Oregon Halloween Town celebration. Like, what? It doesn't matter. I get my money and the people have a great time. Who cares? There is no higher level. So,
well, talking about higher levels,
yeah.
do you work the street less now that you've cracked doing festivals? Did your queuing up on pitches diminish?
It depends on the year. You know, some years you book like 4 or 5 festivals. Some years you book like 2 and 2 or 3. And
I know some performers, they got a sense of when they cracked the festival circuit, they thought, well, that's behind me now, you know. And it sounds like, from what you just said, that wouldn't be you.
No, I didn't take off to quite that same extent. You know, festivals weren't like throwing themselves at me. You know, I don't always kill myself to book things either, because I always know that I have the street, and Faneuil Hall is such a regular, accessible pitch that I could just work in it. It's quite comfortable. It's not like a festival. It still is street performing, but it's not like street performing in Key West. It's not like the same kind of grind. So I get to stay home and make an amount of money that I'm happy with.
And now, as we reach the last 10 minutes of the interview, there's a couple of questions I ask nearly every guest. The first one is, what would you say to young street performers? Any advice you could give?
I have important advice, especially for young women street performers. And that is, you're going to suck. Like, it doesn't matter. Like, you can come out of art school or theater school and put together like the most beautiful, perfect conceptual show you've ever seen in your life. And you're going to meet the street, and the street is going to, it's going to be cold. You know, they're just going to walk away. The show is not going to work, and it's going to be embarrassing, and it's going to feel bad, but keep going. Like, keep going, listen to your audience, see what they react to, see what works with them, write, adjust, work harder. Because I think women generally are not taught they're taught that embarrassing yourself is bad. We're taught not to, that being humiliated is the worst thing that can happen to you, and you're not supposed to be in that position, but it's going to happen, and just keep pushing through it. Keep doing your shows, keep adjusting.
That's wonderful advice. Really good advice. Creativity on the street. Do you think that nowadays there's less creativity than was before? Do you think there's problems with creativity on the street? Do you think there's something we can do to try and get people creating more diverse work, like doing these interviews? I've kind of discovered in the 80s, early 90s, there seemed to be a lot more diversity on the street.
Yeah, I haven't observed that in the same way, because, you know, I've been doing circus for 20 years, but only street for the last 12. So in that time, I have seen, you know, the formula show work. And there is some truth to the fact that people's attention spans now are very specific. So not necessarily lower, but they're very specific. So
what do you mean by specific?
I think people need to be engaged constantly, you know? And that's why the structure works, because the structure is clear, right? Always be selling your next trick. Always be selling your next trick as you're doing your first trick. Don't, like, make sure your transitions are clean. Make sure, this is advice for new street performers. Run your blocking. Know where your props are. Know where you are going to move on the pitch. Know what order you put your props in the case, so that when you reach into your kit. You just pick it up. It's such a little thing to practice, but practice it before you get on the street. Practice set everything up in a clear space so that when you're talking to people, you know, and you go, and for my next trick, I'm going to juggle a knife, as opposed to for my next trick, I'm going to juggle. Your crowd is gone. They're gone. So just block it out. But as far as like attention forms and structures, here's something that I will say. I will say that look at the structure, respect the structure, understand how the structure works and why. Understand why it works. And once you understand why the structure works, you can modify it or follow it consciously, however you are. Don't take advice from street performers who tell you you have to do your show this way. You have to have this in your show. You have to do this with your transitions. Look at why those transitions work. Take out the material. Don't just copy everybody else's joke. Maybe like at the beginning when you're learning how to deliver a joke, deliver a stock line, whatever. But as you get better, just take that material out and fill the structure in with yourself, and you'll have such a more unique show that still can work. Like, you don't have to be like a starving clown like screaming like, you don't respect me, you don't pay attention to me. I'm gonna get in so much trouble for saying that, but you know what I'm saying. Like, you don't have to do a show that nobody watches just so that you can be a real artist. Look at the reasons that things work on the street and put yourself into those things.
Great advice. One of the other things to say is, where do you think your future's going now? Where do you see yourself after the end of COVID when things open back up?
I am hopeful that we'll be able to work. I think the contingency I've planned for is that this year is going to be hard. This coming year for us anyway. I don't know. Some events will come back and some events will be scaled back and some events might not happen. So it might just be a year of grinding it out on the street. And I'm ready for that. Like, it's okay if I have to take, you know, street money and festival money are very different. And if I have to just live off of a street money for a year or travel to different pitches just to like cobble it together and make it work, I'm really looking forward to just being able to connect with people. And, you know, I turned 40 this year. I was kind of hoping to have like a great 39th year season, and I just had no season. But as I get older, you know, obviously a one-handed handstand probably will not be in my future in my 50s. As I have gotten older, my writing and my performing has gotten better. And I hope that I can continue to write new and interesting material so that when I am unable to do skill shows at the same level, the show is equally entertaining. Because at the end of the day, like I only do a one-handed handstand because I actually really love to do a one-handed handstand. I don't feel like I need to do a one-handed handstand to have a successful show. I do it because I really like it. I mean, like, if you could do a one-handed handstand, wouldn't you? It's really freaking cool. But to me, the most important thing is to be a good entertainer. And if I can continue to be a good entertainer until I can't, then I'll be a very happy person.
Do you see yourself going into teaching? That's something that I've seen a lot of people do when they reach the whiling years.
You know, I don't know. I'm not as much of a planner as that. I don't know that I want to spend the end of my career as a coach. I might want to move into a different area of life, maybe a different career, or maybe just continue to develop my writing and performing skills and work in different kind of venues, more compering than handstands, something like that.
Yeah. So we're reaching the last few minutes now. So to finish off, I'd like to allow you to speak to the people that watch, because I'm sure a lot of the people watch, the people you've worked with, friends you've had on the way. There's definitely people I've glanced over at the comments during the interview. Thank you everyone for commenting and seen people giving you love and say, you know, talking about times you've met. And is there something you'd like to say to everybody?
Yeah, if you have gigs, give them to me. No. No, honestly, I love I love being able to see the comments. Thank you all for commenting. And you know, despite the fact that as a community, we have a lot of problems and there's a lot of tension and a lot of difficulty, I really thank everybody that I've met along the way. It's made my life fuller and richer and better than I could have ever imagined as a like shy, closeted transgender kid growing up in Florida, not knowing if I would ever be able to transition or have any kind of life outside of like, you know, a very marginalized existence. So thank you everybody who's watched my show and who's supported my career for just letting me be a full person and have a great life.
Kate, it's been absolutely wonderful talking to you. It genuinely has. I really appreciate the time you've given, the stories, your knowledge, your insights. Absolute joy. Just quickly, for everyone who's been watching, guys, if you've watched and you've enjoyed what we're doing here, please like, share, subscribe. If you can, go to the Patreon, support the project. Otherwise, I'm going to say thank you very much, everybody. Have a really good night. Goodbye, everybody.